Thank you everybody for joining Digital Transformation Large Scale Change webinar. I'm so excited to be with you today. I've got Matt Bull, CTO with Elanco, Mike Henry, and as the Executive Director of Elanco, and Magic Tan, a Principal at Alcor. So just real quickly before we get started, I wanted to let the audience know that we do have a Q&A section here at the bottom of the screen where you can enter any questions you have throughout the webinar, and we will take those in the last 10 minutes of the call. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So introducing Mike Henry as Executive Director of TechOps at Elanco, accountable for all infrastructure services and support globally, including hybrid and multi-cloud hosting. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Pam. Good morning to you.
Yes. We also have Matt Bull on the call. Matt is the Chief Technology Officer at CTO at Elanco, accountable for the technology strategy, architecture, engineering, strategic technology investments, innovation, and external engagement. Welcome, Matt.
Morning.
And then last but not least, Ziying Magic Tan is the Senior Principal here at Alcor for Customer Success. He has led a number of large digital transformation initiatives over his career for Fortune 1000 companies and consulted in nearly every industry across the globe. Welcome, Magic.
Thank you, Pamela. Excited to be here.
Yes, great to have you. And I'm Pamela Morris, the Director at Alcor, Director for Customer Success. So with that, would love to just get to know a little bit about each of you. So I'd like to start with Matt. Can you please tell me a little bit about your digital transformation journey over the past few years? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me set the scene a little bit here for the discussion. So it's fair to say it's been a crazy couple of years for Elanco. And for those that don't know, Elanco is an animal health company. We support those who raise and care for animals, specifically two sides of our business, the pet side and the farm side. In September 2018, it feels like a very long time ago now with everything that's happened across the world, Elanco announced its plan to divest from what was at the time its parent company, Eli Lilly. Elanco previously was a business function of Eli Lilly. Therefore, we consumed all of the IT services from the parent. Therefore, what made the divestiture really quite unique was the fact that we had to go in and rebuild IT from the ground up. And when I say rebuild from the ground up, I literally mean everything. So that was the underlying architecture, the technologies, all of the processes, as well as much of the organization itself. So we really did have a blank sheet of paper that we had to build from. Now, to make things interesting throughout that journey, and it was a 2-year process that we executed as part of the divestiture, we actually demonstrated our ambition as a standalone company with a major acquisition of Bayer Animal Health during that same window. So on one hand, we are divesting, and on the other hand, we are executing a major acquisition. And it essentially doubled the size of the organization. So from an IT standpoint, we went from about 8,000 users of the ecosystem up to somewhere in the region of 15,000+. And that is across about 65 different countries around the world where we have facilities, including 24/7 manufacturing and R&D practices. Now, of course, if the divestiture and the acquisition wasn't enough, obviously we then had the global pandemic. And really that then became a backdrop to everything that we had to accomplish during that time period. So today, what we hope to do is share a little bit about that journey. We believe it's pretty unique. Rarely do you get the opportunity to pull the reboot lever and rebuild everything from the ground up. And of course, because of the other components with the acquisition and the pandemic, there was some creativity and different thinking that needed to come to the forefront to make sure that we were successful. So that's the framing. Mike, would you add anything?
No, I think you framed it up really well, Matt. But I guess the only thing I would add is that there was also the people element. So there was not just processes, technology, but we didn't have any of the people either. So there were a lot of teams and recruitment and team building engagement side of the equation that needed to be created as well.
And I know Magic for Alcor, not only did we partner with Elanco during this incredible journey, but you've also have experience with other large scale transformation projects.
Yeah, definitely. So, definitely I had the time to be part of the digital transformation for other companies over the years. Definitely had my own observation, right, of some of the latest trend, what's going on. But to experience what we just went through at Elanco and partner with Matt and Mike in this journey, is truly eye-opening, and definitely a lot to share in terms of just the speed, right, of the execution that's required, and how the latest changes in technology that enable it, and how they work with different partners, set up their contract mechanism. There's a lot of innovations from that regard. So very excited as we go through this webinar to share some of that insight with the audience.
We have a lot to unpack. It's really exciting to talk through some of the lessons learned. So when I think about the journey that you guys have been on, how many times in life do we wish we had a do-over? For all intents and purposes, you guys got one. You had the opportunity to start from scratch across the digital landscape. So because we were on that journey with you, we witnessed firsthand how difficult that actually ended up being, surprisingly. As much as it's a fun thought to be able to start from scratch, there were lots and lots of difficult junctures in the road. So now that you're fully divested and those initial decisions have been made, I'm really interested in hearing what you learned. So just as a broad question, I'd like to start with Matt to reflect on some of the things that you learned through this journey.
Yeah, so for much of my career, even prior to Elanco, I'd spent time working in an enterprise organization with a long heritage. And the reality is, you incur a lot of technical debt, you incur a lot of legacy during that time. And those really become a barrier and often even a roadblock to modernization, to innovation, to agility, all of the buzzwords that we look for from a business outcomes perspective. So when we had the opportunity to go and rebuild everything from the ground up, for me, I saw it as a once in a lifetime opportunity, incredibly exciting. What I think I probably underestimated is that there is a pretty significant set of challenges to even having the blank sheet of paper. I think it's important to recognize that usually, at least from my experience, you would go after maybe one, maybe two major initiatives at any one time, allowing you to focus, allowing you to prioritize effectively. We didn't have that luxury. We had to do everything, and we had a restricted time window to achieve the outcome. So dependency mapping and prioritization became a real challenge. We had to stand up our identity services, our hosting, our networking. We had to stand up ERP, HR, these core business processes that support critical functions across the organization. And it's worth acknowledging the fact that Elanco didn't stand still during that time. It's not as if the business took a 2-year holiday and waited for the IT guys to get the job done. So we had to enable a level of business continuity so that Elanco could continue to grow during that time period, whilst at the same time execute against our vision to be able to hopefully deliver a kind of a quantum leap forward in terms of our technological and process capabilities. So I guess what I'm saying is it feels like the grass is always greener, and I would still much prefer the greenfield opportunity of building from the ground up versus carrying the debt. But there's still a lot of challenge associated with that. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that detail as we go through.
Amazing. Mike, I'd love to hear your thoughts as you reflect on the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think a few things I learned that we probably repeat, and a couple of things that I learned that we probably would do differently next time. But I think the positives were we really focused on setting a culture and some key principles right off the bat. So we knew it was going to be a huge program. There's no way we could detail everything out that we were going to have to do. So we set some principles and some outcomes we wanted to reach, and that was really important. And then we set the culture of the team that we would build, even down to the fact that we even used the phrase that we don't just want warm bodies occupying seats to get recruitment going as quickly as possible. We wanted the right people, and that took a little bit longer, but was definitely worthwhile, and I'd certainly do that again. And then on the culture side, we extended that to our partners. So we didn't just build a culture for the internal team, we actually decided that we would our partners into that same culture, and we sought out those key partners that shared our culture. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there that do the sorts of things that we needed, but not as many that actually shared our values and behaviors. So I think that was really important. We'd certainly do that again as well. And then the one thing we learned was around communications and OCM. And actually, I still think we managed to underestimate it, even though we said at the start, this is going to be really important, we must do a good job. As we got into the details and the day-to-day grind, it kept getting pushed further and further backward, and we didn't do a great job. But we also realized that because the whole company was changing at the same time, so it wasn't just IT rebuilding, but finance were rebuilding, HR were rebuilding, the quality organization were rebuilding, and people just couldn't absorb information either. So it was communication and OCM, probably unsurprisingly to most on the call, became one of our challenges that I'd probably think about how we would do that differently next time.
Yeah, that's it's just a little daunting to think about how much those communications would span across all of the work that you've done. Magic, I know that you have been on the journey with Elanco over the past couple of years. Anything you'd like to talk about as you reflect on those past couple of years?
Absolutely. And if I compare this journey, right, with some other journeys I've gone through, one of the biggest challenges, right, at least from a consulting side, we always observe is how do you balance, right, when you go through a digital transformation, you're probably going to rely on some technology, and all of this technology come with standard configuration, standard out-of-the-box functionalities. But then each of these organizations oftentimes will have their own legacy processes and legacy design considerations. And oftentimes the biggest challenge is to how do you balance that, right? How between an organization's unique needs and some of the out-of-the-box functionalities. And that requires leadership to make strategic decisions in a timely fashion. And I felt like the biggest, I think, lesson learned I got throughout this journey is Mike, Matt, and their team constantly are able to reconcile that quickly and make very timely decision to push forward the initiative. Because they're operating in a highly regulated environment as well, right? So it's oftentimes just not easy to make those decisions, but they were able to do that. And I thought that was a critical success element to this initiative.
So Mike, I'd like to start with you on this next question. So with the incredible journey you've been on over the past 3 years that frankly very few people get to experience, how did you prepare for this large scale change?
I think me and Matt had a little cry at first when we realized the size of the journey ahead. So actually, we didn't cover in the intro that it was actually just myself and Matt in the very early days. We didn't have any team at all, so we had to recruit quickly. But that still was, as many people understand, there's a lag in that. So we were both over everything right at the beginning. But we divided out to our strengths. So Matt very much on the technology side and elements of the people and process as well. And then we worked together because it was clear that we were going to have to cover for each other for that period of time, and then allocated out responsibilities as best we could to those strengths, and then just had to trust each other that the decisions we made or the direction we took was the right one, because we didn't have time to really stop and reflect too often on where we were going. We did, however, at the beginning lay out and I alluded to this earlier, we laid out a kind of master plan, a kind of the outcomes we wanted to achieve, even if they were principles. Sometimes they were actually technologies that we wanted to get to. And that became really our strategic document that we shared with everybody right from the very start. And interestingly, if you look at that diagram today, it pretty much resembles what we built. So it was definitely something worthwhile doing right at the beginning to help us know if we were going to be on the right track and help us measure as we went through. So that was really important. And then we then just had to move forward. So there wasn't too much time for planning. We picked an implementation partner really quickly, and of course got introduced to yourselves at Alcor when we looked at our shared SLA model that we wanted to implement. We brought Alcor in to help us kind of realize that outcome as well that we wanted to see. And then we just started recruiting as fast as humanly possible to get leaders over each of those work streams. And it kind of grew from there.
And then Matt, I know one of the sayings that I heard often and probably repeated myself as well is, we found ourselves flying the plane as we built it. But really good to hear that the planning that you guys did early on actually was a solid plan. It came to fruition. So when you think about how you prepared for this journey, any thoughts you have around that?
Yeah, I think the key one was what Mike highlighted, which is starting with the people. Bring talented individuals to Elanco, whether it be directly or through our partners, and really unleash them, hopefully, with a level of autonomy to go and do great things. And I believe we accomplished that. So that absolutely is front and foremost. I think the other piece, though, that was important to us was the sort of methodology that we took. We recognized that we had a very defined window of time. And we had to accept pretty early on that a lot of what we were going to implement needed to be really a minimum viable product. It needed to set a strong foundation that we could build from for years to come, but fundamentally wouldn't be at the level of maturity that probably any of us would desire, if all things were created equal. So there's the saying around, perfection is the enemy of progress. We had to be cautious of that, pick our battles carefully, really make sure that we were executing with thinking about our priorities and executing where we're in those critical areas that we knew were going to support key business functions, and really making sure that we came to a position where the foundations were strong. So for me, prioritization and really having an iterative or MVP type mindset was critical to be able to achieve our goals within the timeline.
Yeah, and I'll just add on top of that was a really difficult message to get across to the rest of the organization, because coming from a parent company that's been established for over 125 years, very mature processes, everybody knew their role. There was expectations that it would be the same in Elanco and that everything would be the same, and they simply weren't going to be the same. And I believe that we made some things better, but many things were not as good or as stable or as process driven as they once were. And that became quite a difficult message throughout, because people just expected so much more. They didn't really grasp the enormity of the ask.
So to that point, Mike, when you think about large scale change and what it takes to make that happen, and you talked about those initial perceptions of what this might be like, and everybody had their own perception, would you say making that change was harder earlier on, and as people started to see this MVP model and the vision, it was easier? Or do you feel that there was still resistance to change?
I actually think it was easier early on, because we had a good year where we were just using our parent company systems whilst we were building the foundations on the Elanco side, and it was much more streamlined and efficient because we were making decisions quickly and within a certain group or bubble. It's when we then went out to to start to tell the story to the organization and start to migrate users across, that's when it became harder, because people saw for themselves what the reality was going to be. And that's when they realized their expectations were not going to be met, even though we were describing it the entire way through. I mean, I think we published something like 100 blogs in the first 9 months for people to go read, and we shared on corporate comms newsletters. But as I said before, people were just saturated with information. And it's only when it started happening, people realized what the reality was going to be like. And it wasn't bad, it just wasn't the same. And people went through those stages of change, right, when things aren't the same. So they go through that curve, and yeah, that was a tough time. And then I would say that people have really come to accept it now, but it's taken a really long time for people to get used to the way things are, and understand that things are actually better than they thought. Again, services like the service desk or the help desk, people always complain about that, but actually we've built a service desk that is fundamentally very, very good, very, very solid. I don't think you can ever describe one as great. And I think people have now realized that and got used to that.
Magic, I know that Matt and Mike have talked about the shared SLA model, and I know that you were instrumental in helping put that together. Did you want to introduce that?
Absolutely, because as I reflect on this, right, when you talk about communication, the OCM they have done internally to Elanco employees, I would say they have also done equally amazing job in doing OCM for the vendor community, right? Because I would love to hear some, opinion even from the audience as well. I think all of us historically have had the experience of structuring an outsourcing contract where every vendor has their own tower SLA, they focus on their own playground, so to speak, but really have a lesser incentive, right, to focus on the end-to-end outcome to the enterprise end user base. And oftentimes the employee of that company will actually become that face, and it's creating challenges and from a contract, from a relationship standpoint. But this time around, from the get-go, right, the mandate from Elanco, was, hey, we don't want to necessarily follow the traditional model. We want to build a community where all the vendors come together and they don't just focus on their own power and their own performance. We want everybody to have the mindset to focus on end-to-end service, to focus on the outcome that, hey, to make sure that our employees, our end users are happy, right? And that initially, when we structured the shared SLA, the concept that, hey, if something goes wrong, not only the help desk gets the time with Mike to have a conversation, but everybody will get that. But when we are successful, everybody gets to celebrate together, right? So that's how we structure the whole the contract with everyone. And I thought that was instrumental in changing it, because even if you look at the journey we went through, right, it has never been a truly stable environment, because we're building the plane, right? If from the get-go the vendor carries the traditional mindset, it would be very difficult to support a dynamic environment like this. I thought that was very, very important to establish that shared SLA and shared outcome mindset from the get-go, and then we're able to actually put those things into the contract, into the behavior of the vendors, and constantly doing the OCM with the vendors through the Cyan team that we established. That was actually very innovative, based on my experience in the outsourcing industry, and something to share with everyone. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Pam, I was just saying that's definitely more of a journey than a destination, right? So if you remember the contracting sessions between multiple partners to try and arrive at how we're going to measure and run and operate, but it was, I ultimately believe it's going to be worth it. So we're not there yet. We're still moving forwards with that. We measure end to end. The clock never stops. It doesn't matter who gets the ticket or who's up to resolve it. Everybody's accountable for a successful outcome or resolution to that problem. And I do believe that that's going to pay dividends in the long run. And we don't see 99% SLA achievements, right? Because that's just never going to happen. But we are constantly improving, and we can really measure the time it takes and the impact to the customer by doing that. So yeah, very, very important decision that we made.
So you've talked about a divestiture, you've talked about acquisition, doubling your company, starting from the ground up, going through and making those plans, going through OCM. What, on the other side of that, the past 3 years, what do you think has surprised you the most through this journey? And Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think what was surprising to me, you have a perspective going into major programs or projects of this nature of what it's going to take. And that's really built on what you know of the current ecosystem or requirements that you have. Very early on, one of the first things we did was a application data dependency mapping exercise, where we essentially stepped through all of the Elanco business processes to understand the associated technologies that supported those processes. And maybe unsurprisingly, but it probably did surprise a few people at the time, there was a lot there that we had not accounted for, that we had no real understanding of. And whether you call that shadow IT or things that just have appeared over time, but maybe fallen off the support radar. But we ended up with, I think the number at the end was about 1,100 applications that support Elanco. And considering the size of our organization, which is not small, but it's also not huge, that was a lot. So we needed to then go through an exercise where we really categorize those applications. We looked to understand, what could be consolidated, frankly, what could be retired. And then critically, could we go after modernization or refactoring to bring that forward in a way that would make it easier to support, more cost effective, more value to the business. And then again, as with all things where there is a time pressure associated, a certain amount of compromise in terms of what needed to be lifted and shifted. So I guess the surprise elements were all of the unknowns that you only uncover when you start to scrape sort of beneath the top few layers that sort of took us back.
Yeah, one thing that occurs to me, Pam, is I was surprised by, it's going to sound like Winston Churchill or something now, but constantly surprised by how much could be achieved by such few amount of people. And I think the team, many may be surprised to hear, but our internal team is still only 24 people today in my team. There's so many services to build, and obviously we had an army of partners and vendors involved in that. But it was internal people that ran each work stream, that made the design decisions, and were right there in the trenches helping to build as we were going through. And that still surprises me that we managed to do it. And I think many of us compartmentalized during the process. We didn't let ourselves see the full scope of what was still to come. And then when the pandemic hit in particular, that was a crazy time. But I think it was the heroics of the people.
So I think you guys are one of the few that can actually tell us how to eat an elephant. One bite at a time, and you guys figured that out. So I want to touch on the word partnership that you've talked about a couple of times. So you've emphasized partnership when working with vendors. What does that mean to you, and why is it important to transformation?
Yeah, so I've been around for a while, always worked in IT, and worked with many different vendors where the relationship was really driven by measurements and contracts. And often I found that it would all be exciting at the beginning, the contract gets signed, and then the relationship would typically get worse from there, frankly. And what we wanted to do this time is really go for a partnership approach and make that really clear up front. It goes back to the culture we were looking for. People that cared and were going to buy in to be as accountable as we were to the outcome. and less interested in some of the details of the contract, which can be dangerous, of course. But we trusted in our partners, and we also were looking for people that we would obviously invest in them, and we were excited about how they would invest in us as well. Really put emphasis on, okay, how are you going to help us and invest in us get to that outcome, because there was rewards for everybody involved. Case studies, media opportunities, of course. So all of our partners were going to benefit from that in the end. And we wanted people that didn't just want another payday. We wanted people that were actually thought that the journey was going to be cool, and they were excited to be part of doing it, which we said is very few people get the opportunity for that blank piece of paper. So that's why I talk about partnership more than a vendor relationship. And we're trying our hardest not to settle into that vendor customer relationship as we move more into operations now, which is definitely the temptation.
Mm-hmm. And Matt, what are your thoughts on how you guys handle those partnerships?
Yeah, so I obviously agree with Mike's comments, and I would maybe add an additional lens to that, which would be, over the 2 years, it's fair to say not everything went perfectly, as you might imagine. Of course, when the pandemic hit and other external factors came into play that were unforeseen and frankly unpredictable, we had to adapt on the fly. And to me, that is where the strength or the word partnership is tested, in a sense. And we had many of those examples, not just with our vendors, but also internally as well. And to me, that is really what comes back to some of the tenets or principles that Mike just alluded to, which is the individuals working on the program at Elanco, whether it be from the vendors or internally, they wanted to be here. And yes, they were fatigued and at times, no doubt, frustrated. But it was the core belief that what we were doing was exciting and that the outcome was worth striving towards that I think kept people engaged and focused. And we also had, I feel, a little bit of a startup vibe, in the sense that it was very much all hands on deck. There wasn't much really hierarchy or bureaucracy that can sometimes exist and can frankly, at times be a barrier. Really it felt like people were rolling up their sleeves and getting stuck in. And there's a certain scrappiness to that spirit that I think generates a really strong bond amongst those that have been part of a process of that nature. So to me, those are the tenets of the partnership that, we need to formalize a touch now, of course, to be operational at scale, but I hope we don't lose the spirit of what we've achieved, over the last couple of years.
And I know from a partner perspective, we have absolutely enjoyed our journey with not only the two of you, but the other business areas within Elanco. As you look back at all the things that you've talked about, would you actually sign up for some of that madness? But we certainly would. And so Magic, I wanted to just kind of pass to you and let you talk a little bit about the partnership that we've enjoyed with these guys.
Yeah, I think Mike made a point that really resonated with me, and the fact that the focus from Elanco has always been the outcome and the success, and less on penalties, right? Because I have structured myself. I live on the customer side and vendor side on large outsourcing contract where everything is a SLA, there are hundreds of SLAs, and then on the vendor they actually have to have a SLA manager every weekly or monthly. This is a contentious meeting with the VMO, with the contract owner. Hey, did I miss my SLA? Why I didn't miss? And it just is divested the tension, the resources, where they can actually focus on the real outcome, right? The real issue at hand. Why oftentimes you'll find it's not actually in those SLA, it's actually in something completely different area. The other thing I would say is, I think Elanco has done a great job in celebrating small victories, celebrating success, because it's a stressful thing, right? If you think about what Mike and Matt alluded to, it's a very lean team. We have a lot to accomplish, right? Things will drop from time to time, but also the team have done amazing job in accomplish of many milestones together. So they constantly celebrate these victories, send accolades to our team directly, and that goes a long way to boost the morale of a partner. And it just drives us further to work harder to accomplish the same goal. And oftentimes when we talk together, the mandate I'm hearing from Matt and Mike is always, hey, we want Alcor, we want all the partners to be the extension of our team. You know, whatever pressure outcome that our employees are subject to, we want the vendors to carry the same mentality. And this is exactly how we felt. It's a lot of work. Sometimes it's long days, but at the end of it, we felt like we accomplished something great together. Felt like we're in it together with the Elanco. And I think that was really a huge success for this program.
Absolutely.
And Magic, sorry, Pam, but you just reminded me of something. You talk about celebrating success. And I remember, obviously our head office is in Indianapolis in the US, and Matt and I were frequent visitors pre-pandemic. And it was March 2020, sorry, just traveling back from the US, and we brainstormed on the plane all the different types of celebration and rewards we would give for each phase as we were just starting implementation. And then we landed, of course, and immediately went into lockdown. So all of our plans were kind of scrapped because they were all in-person type events. So yeah, we had to adapt, and I do feel like like many other companies, struggled at first, but we tried our best to adapt to still manage to celebrate those wins as we went through.
So let's talk about that, because that is a big factor in all of the things that you're doing. Now we have a pandemic and everybody works from home, and you guys were I think in the Basingstoke Hook office as well as the Indianapolis office, very present in the office. How did you handle the change to work from home in light of the manufacturing sites you have, the global locations you have? How did you handle that?
Yeah, so I'll touch upon maybe some of the technology aspects, and maybe Mike can expand upon some of the workforce components. But from a technology perspective, we'd obviously lined up a plan that was going to execute over a sort of year timeline to basically cut over not only the physical sites to the new Elanco environment, but also the 15,000 users. And that included delivery of new laptops to everyone, new productivity and collaboration capabilities. It really was just a wholesale change of everything. And our original plan was, hey, we're going to have a very tailored experience. We have great relationships at our local sites that we can lean back on, have people come in, they get their new laptop. It really feels like, hey, this is great. It's part of becoming a separate company with Elanco. Obviously, when the pandemic hit and travel restrictions were put into place, just threw that plan into sort of turmoil overnight. And I think, the question became, how do you still accomplish everything we need to do, knowing that now we can't, physically meet in most places around the world? Now, I think testament to the technology, we had selected a very cloud-first model. The vast majority of our modern services are internet-facing and therefore can be accessed from essentially any device around the world. And the devices that we were provisioning really had a consumer experience. So we used autopilot as a technology, which really meant that the device from the factory, when upon first unboxing and opening, immediately enters sort of the Elanco world. So what we did essentially overnight is shift 14,000 laptop deliveries from going to physical sites to going to every individual employee's home. And that employee now had a completely remote experience. And we had similar creativity at the sites where we couldn't fly people in the way that we had originally planned, specifically in the context of manufacturing and R&D. So we relied a lot on central remote groups and then local hands on the ground to actually execute some of the change, brought in technologies like mixed reality to help and remote assistant capabilities to be able to help bridge that gap between those that were virtually engaged and those who were physically on the ground. And as a technologist, for as much as the situation is not one that anyone would desire, it was a real showcase for what the technology can do if you are able to unleash it in this way. So that was quite exciting.
Amazing. And I have so many thoughts about that. Mike, I wanted to go to you first, and then I know, Magic, you're going to talk about some supply chain issues that we experienced as well.
Yeah, I think on the people side, it was tough, and it actually still is really tough. Even in, I don't know if, how many people are from what different countries. I'm assuming the audience is mostly American, but in the UK now, we've opened up a lot more, so we can go back into the office. But we have teams in the US, in the UK, and Poland predominantly, but also individuals in the team scattered throughout the world, and some people still in lockdown in Asia, in certain Asian countries. And so keeping that consistency globally, so that everybody's getting a similar experience and similar access to people is really difficult. And at the beginning, when we were all in the same situation, we'd have morning calls where people could say hi in the morning and have a coffee together. We'd do interesting celebrations, which would be like remote cocktail making sessions and parties, and I'm sure other companies did very similar things. It's the sustainability of some of those ideas that's been a challenge over time, because we've been in that mode for such a long period, and then you start to see it really impacting people's well-being. And I would say we were obviously there's your Googles and your Facebooks and your Instagrams have hit the news for having well-being weeks and focusing on it in the last few months, but we were having that problem, a year, 18 months ago, and trying to focus on people's well-being and what could we do as a company, or at least in IT specifically, because it was so stressful and so much pressure in what we were doing. So yeah, that's always been tough. I don't have a silver bullet for that. Unfortunately, if people are looking for the answer, we still struggle with that today, but we still make an effort. So we talk to the individuals. We have corporate surveys, of course, but we like to have conversations. We like to try different things, and if they don't work, we fail fast and we go try some different things and then measure to see if they worked and it improved people's experience.
On the people side, we had that as well, where we found that those daily touch points were the most powerful. Yes, you could have happy hours and game nights and all kinds of fun, try and mix it up and create some fun, but really those connection points, and as often as we could do them, the better. And I know you guys did that very well as well. So Magic, wanted to get over to your thoughts on the supply chain issues that we're still seeing.
Yeah, so I think everybody probably, even from the audience, probably experienced this to some extent, right? We've been talking to some other customers, especially in the asset management space. There's been long delays, right, in being able to procure the hardware from the OEMs, and whether it's infrastructure hardware or end user computing, and it's a challenge, right? And to Mike's point, during the pandemic, even from a people being able to travel, it's been a challenge. So, one thing, I reflect on this because we've been working with Elanco. We don't hear that challenge specifically. I know there are probably concerns, but I think they were able to overcome it. And some of it has to do with their design, right? Matt mentioned about cloud first. She mentioned about the approach from being able to ship device directly from OEM to the end user. I think that those kind of approaches go a long way in cutting down the delay in their supply chain and mitigate the risks. Love to hear more from Matt or Mike on that, the whole disruption in supply chain and what's Elanco thought process around that.
Yeah, so there was definitely a technology component, and I think you're right in saying, Magic, that the selection of our kind of the principles that form our overarching architecture, I think, put us in good position. That focus on cloud first, focus on where possible cross-platform or open source capabilities, which tend to have more availability or an ability for you to spin those up more seamlessly versus being tied to a specific vendor or proprietary technology that might be tied behind supply chain challenges. Now, of course, we still had supply chain challenges. I mean, even to this very day, obviously challenges around specific hardware components that you just simply can't avoid. And honestly, that loops right back around to the partnership piece for me, which is having those established partnerships in such a way that you can lean back on and know that you're going to get strong support, or at least to the best of the ability to close those gaps.
Yeah, and we've talked about the partnership a lot, but that was very important. And we got a bit of a taster of the ongoing supply chain issues that people are seeing today with microchip shortages around the world. And it was a lot to do with that, but also some very resourceful individuals, both internal to Elanco and our partners as well, in how we schedule the work to make best use of when we could get deliveries to certain sites. I mean, the number of times we changed the schedule, poor Brad had to redo that chart for the steering committee probably 3 or 4 times a day. That's how many changes we were making at one point. It got a little bit crazy.
Well, I think we have time for one more question, and then I know we have a question from the audience that I'd like to address. So really to just wrap this up and summarize, where's Elanco IT headed next? Matt, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I'll kind of split it into 2 parts. So firstly, there's still the realities around stabilizing the ecosystem. You've heard us mention a couple of times here that what we implemented in parts was sort of minimum viable product. We also have immaturity around our processes and support. So it's not the sexiest of work, but it has to be done, and it brings stability to the ecosystem and gives Elanco IT credibility amongst our business partners that we can operate at scale effectively. So that's one side of the equation that is going to be a reality for Elanco, certainly probably for the next year, if not beyond. The other side is the piece that gets me, in a sense, more excited, which is the opportunity that we've presented ourselves. We now have an exceptionally modern ecosystem. We are 95% cloud in the way that we operate today. We have taken a lot of what I would describe as commodity or highly industrialized processes, and we have really moved them to a point where they are operating with a level of autonomy, whether that be leveraging SaaS vendors or other such capabilities. And I think our ecosystem as a whole is largely programmatically defined, meaning that we can automate a lot of the ecosystem. So when you bring all of that together, I think what you have is a foundation for a digital business. And that's exciting because we can then start to explore as a business, what does the future of digital and data business models look like? Bring them in alongside our traditional business models, which could actually usher in the next sort of era of Elanco. And to know that that's powered by the work that we've done on the IT side, as well as potentially giving us a true competitive advantage, is incredibly exciting. And for me, that's the piece I'm eager to see us exploit over the next year and beyond.
Exciting. Mike?
I think Matt covered our strategy really well. I mean, specific to infrastructure, of course, despite the blank piece of paper, we still had to make compromises. Matt spoke earlier about applications, and we didn't know exactly what we'd need. So we do have colo data centers as well as the cloud. We do have edge compute and storage. I'd love to operate in a world where we don't run our own network and we don't have any colo data centers, and we move a lot more towards automation and AI ops. So that's on the roadmap. That's the next exciting transformation, if you like. But for now, it's operational stabilization and maturity of our processes and get out of that MVP and into a well-oiled machine.
There you go. And Magic, any last thoughts on this journey that we've had with Elanco?
No, I think we covered the most important points. I'll just say, we were able to set the culture, and we'll be here to support Elanco in continuing that culture of partnership, outcome-based, share SLA mindset across the board. I think if we can sustain that, future will be very bright here.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you guys, and a pleasure wrapping it up and talking today with you about it. We do have a question from the audience. Tom Wilson is addressing a comment that Matt said, had to do everything all at once at the same time. Dependency mapping became critical. The question is, how did you manage, facilitate, track, communicate dependency mapping? There's several questions in here. I'll start with that one.
Yeah, so there was a couple of pieces to that, and I've seen the wider question, so I can probably hit it more broadly. I mentioned the application data dependency mapping work. That was relatively thorough, but it actually sat alongside a business capability mapping exercise, which again was really to try to understand what are the key business capabilities that support the end-to-end value chain at Elanco, covering everything from manufacturing, R&D, commercial, and global services. In terms of how we maintained a lot of that, it wasn't overly innovative, frankly. We joked a little bit. We did use some of our some cloud-based tooling. One in particular, I won't name and shame, but we did break fundamentally and had to step away from because of the sheer scale that we were describing. And therefore, in a lot of cases, we did default back to the tried and tested tooling. I think the key there, though, for me was the data itself was not that complex, but I think the key was having a very structured way of being able to access and consume that data. And therefore, frankly, the likes of Excel and other such tooling suited that relatively well. We didn't need to go much beyond that in terms of any more advanced sort of analytic capability for that particular piece of work. So that's how we managed it. We continue to evolve today and try to become more sophisticated as to how we manage that ongoing. So whether that be through as part of our wider service management capabilities, how do we make sure that we have a really clear appreciation and understanding of the business processes and the associated technologies that support them, and how do all of those things interconnect? That's valuable in terms of our future investments, but also valuable in terms of our operational efficiency and effectiveness. So that's I think where we are.
And then a follow-up question to that is, with distributed work, leveraging of SaaS apps and being 95% cloud, what else can you share about how you look at security in that model? Thank you, and you don't have to announce my name. Okay.
Yeah, so I think
security is a great question.
It is, absolutely. So I would say philosophically, if you were going to line it up to a sort of known methodology, it would be zero trust would be the target for us. We came from a world that was very much moat and castle, so perimeter-based security for the most part. The challenge, of course, now, as rightfully highlighted in the question, is that we're now highly distributed. We have data everywhere, most of which exists outside of the four walls of Elanco. And we also have users literally everywhere, especially in the new hybrid workforce that we find ourselves in. So our goal was really to take the principles of zero trust and embed that through every step of our design and implementation. Starts with strong identity, which is front and foremost, and then steps through really securing at source, least privileged access, really thinking about the individual assets, and essentially treating the entire ecosystem as hostile, which is a very different concept to the one we came from, where we would really rely on the perimeter walls as our primary defense. But as we all know, if you breach the perimeter walls, then unfortunately you can find yourself in difficulty. So still a long way to go there, but I believe we are absolutely setting ourselves up to be able to operate a hybrid workforce effectively at scale.
And I see your lanyards there in the background, thinking about the pandemic and lockdown and working everything remotely. What are your guys' plans? When do you think things will open up? I think you're back in the office on just a few days a week.
Yeah, it'll be a while before we come and see you again, Pam, unfortunately, I think. I'm still not sure if the UK's persona non gratis in the US right now. So
Right.
it's, I mean, the world has changed anyway. I've been attending a few virtual conferences, and they work just fine. You obviously miss the personal connections that you sometimes make when you're traveling around different places. But yeah, I can't say I miss the travel that much.
Right. That's
Yeah,
cool.
I would say the same for Mike. We traveled a lot together previously. We now stare at each other on screens a lot. But yeah, hopefully we do get back to a position where, you know, we have those opportunities, and hopefully it isn't too far away. But I do, as Mike rightfully stated, the world has shifted, and hopefully some positive will come from that.
Well, we'd love to host you guys in Northern California when the time is right.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, with that, I think that ends our time together. Really appreciate all your thoughts and being able to carve out some time and take a look back at some of the things that we've learned over the past couple of years. It's been great partnering with you guys, and we look forward to continued success with you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.